let's talk a little bit about education. There are basically three views in the world of the purpose of an education. Some people would say that the purpose of an education is to make you a good citizen. That's why we have government-sponsored education. In their view, that you in a democratic society, people need to be educated in order to know what they're talking about when they go to the polls and vote. Voters are expected to make decisions based upon rational choices rather than upon just mere emotion. You're not really supposed to elect a candidate just because you think that candidate seems like a nice person or seems like a cool person. There was I read a column recently about our current president that said, back when, or maybe even in a cartoon, I forget, but back, years ago, there was some poll that many people said that President Bush was the kind of guy they'd like to have a beer with. And some person in retrospect who had voted in favor of that poll said, but in retrospect, I don't know if I'm a person I want to have a beer with isn't necessarily somebody I want to have as my president. You don't just vote for this candidate because he's young and handsome and charismatic, and you aren't really supposed to vote for that candidate because he's old and a veteran and whatever. You're supposed to vote for the candidate because of what his ideological beliefs are, whether they correspond with yours. You're supposed to vote for a candidate based upon how qualified you think that candidate is to actually run the country, or what ideas they bring to the table, or what what their experience is, what they've done in the past, how honest they are. Do they have they fulfilled their campaign promises in the past, or are they trustworthy to do what they say they're going to do? These are the factors that people are supposed to consider. So in theory, part of the purpose of an education is to make you a good citizen, to make you a smart citizen, to make you a responsible citizen. We'll come back to this in a moment. Another theory of education is that the primary purpose of an education, that is to give you a job. All right, and I think that's what most of us tend to think, especially when we're at the college days, right? You go to college to get a good job is the motivation most people have these days for going to college. This ties in with the citizen idea because, for those who say that the primary purpose is to be a good citizen, they would look at the purpose of getting a good job and say, well, having a job and contributing to society is part of being a good citizen, right? If you don't have a good job, you're going to be on welfare and so forth. So they would say that that's part and parcel of being a good citizen. So in turn, that they're proven that the purpose of an education is to be a good citizen. Whereas others would still insist that it is primarily to have a job, and that sort of the vote thing is secondary. Maybe they would say, well, most people vote for silly reasons anyway, or something. Well, the third purpose of an education is to make you a better person. Okay, and while I doubt that many people in our society would necessarily see it that way, really that is the purpose of an education. I mean, both those other two purposes derive from it, or are included in it. Just as, having a good job would be included in being a good citizen, both having a good job and discerning what would be your best, most fulfilling job for you is part of being the best person you can be. Being a good citizen is part of being the best person you can be. So there are those of us who argue that the purpose of an education is to make you the best person you can be overall, to help you to truly develop yourself, both by learning to conform in some ways to standards of society, to learn what those standards are and how to conform to them so that you can fit in better, but also learning what is your particular taste. So, for example, you take a literature course to teach you sort of the rules of how to look at literature intellectually, how to look at literature critically, and sort of expose you to things that you might not otherwise be inclined to read in your everyday life. However, no one, when you take a literature course, expects you to come out of that course necessarily liking Shakespeare, or necessarily liking Nathaniel Hawthorne, or necessarily liking Flannery O'Connor. But we do expect you to, have some level of understanding of what those people are all about, and maybe one of those people will, sort of appeal to you. When I took music appreciation when I was a freshman in college, I had a general inclination towards classical music, but I basically knew Beethoven and that was it. I really didn't know a lot about the different genres of music throughout history, and that's why I took that course, and I learned a great deal from it, and I found out, works that I'd always liked. I found who actually wrote them and what their titles were. I was like, oh, okay, I recognize that melody, and I've always liked that tune, and and then certain composers, I learned, hey, I really do like that composer's work overall, or I really like that genre. And so, you learn, you say, oh, okay, this is something I really like, and you take that out. You don't have to necessarily, not everything I listened to in a music appreciation course, I even remember what it was, much less listen to today or like, but there were several things that came out of that became long-term interests for me. Same with many literature courses I've taken over the years, and many history courses and other subjects that, the purpose is to sort of introduce you to things. Similar, and then just as with the job thing, one of the reasons that you get educated to get a job is not so much to learn how to do the job, it's also just as much to pick what job is best for you. Okay? You learn in high school and college a variety of different subjects and a variety of different fields to kind of let you see what's out there. All right. Although I think I have a personal pet theory that most of us have pretty much decided what we want to be by the time we're 5. I think most kids, I think back to what I said I want to be when I was 5, and I'm basically doing it. But regardless of that, theoretically, the purpose of an education wraps all these things into it. Now that's important for English class for several reasons. One is when you're in an English class, you often wonder why. Right. Oftentimes, English seems like the most stupid class. Partly because we feel like we already know what we're doing, or we're so sort of scarred by years of quote-unquote getting it wrong that we feel like we're just no good at English. So many of my students say, I'm just no good at writing, I'm just no good at English. Many of them come out of my class with an A and a totally different view of their abilities as writers. But so we have negative feelings towards English, and a lot of times when we're part of Group A or Group B, the good citizen group or the good job group, we don't really see how courses like English or history fit into that. What does this have to do with me? All right. Well, in terms of being a good citizen, English class, again, teaches you how to communicate. We've already discussed this, how it teaches you how to communicate, how to share your ideas with others, so to avoid misunderstandings, to help try to achieve better social cohesion, so that when you share your ideas, unnecessary misunderstandings hopefully will not happen, so that you can communicate your ideas better to affect social change in the way you want to see social change. So that you can read more critically, okay? So that you can examine the claims of politicians and see if they really hold water, to see sources of different pundits and commentators and everything, and as you read different people, to learn to read critically and ask questions, even if you're inclined to agree with them. What are their sources? Where do they get these things from? This is one of the reasons that you take an English course, is to teach you these kinds of critical thinking skills that, again, make you a better citizen. What about the workplace? Well, effective communication, for the same reason as it's important in society, is important in the workplace. Careers have been lost over punctuation errors or typos. I read a story about a woman who cost her company thousands and thousands of dollars because she typed the wrong date for a conference in an email, and all these people booked their flights for the conference, and then when they sent out the correction that she'd made a typo in her email, well, all those people had to change their flights, and the penalties from the airlines were charged to the company. That cost the company like $30,000. My wife was talking to somebody recently who said that she used to work as an accountant, and that person made an error as an accountant that cost her company millions. All right. So, sometimes these things happen, okay? But we try to avoid them, and we take an English class so we can learn these rules to avoid these errors. And again, so we can think critically.